Welcome to the debate. Usually when we look at a beautifully formatted, highly polished resume or, say, a LinkedIn profile, there's an assumption of underlying substance. It is sort of like looking at a finished skyscraper. You just assume there is a rigid steel frame holding it all up.
Right, yeah, you assume that structural integrity exists because the surface looks so pristine. I mean, we have basically been conditioned over decades to believe that professional fluency equals professional competence. If someone can write perfectly about project management, well, they must be a good project manager.
Right. But then you introduce artificial intelligence into the world of professional documentation, and suddenly that assumption just completely collapses. The surface can look like a masterpiece of engineering, but behind it, there might not be a single piece of steel. We are looking at a landscape where the cost of generating an immaculate, flawless professional surface it's basically zero.
It is the absolute definition of an inflation crisis. As the LPR Academy material we're looking at today points out, fluency is no longer evidence. It is just a commodity.
Exactly. And today, we are exploring the critical framework of AI governance within the living professional record system, specifically focusing on the curriculum laid out in Module 7. And before we dive into the weeds, for anyone just getting familiar with this framework, the living professional record, or the LPR, is essentially a verified, governed ledger of someone's actual career evidence.
Yes, it is not a marketing document.
Right. It's the raw, proven facts of what a person has actually done, stripped of all the spin.
It is the bedrock, and the system recognizes a massive shift here. AI can render that bedrock into incredibly polished professional evidence instantly, but this creates a profound tension regarding how we actually govern that AI.
Which brings us to the central question we are debating today. When using AI to render professional evidence, is the strict methodology of source-bound prompting, which explicitly limits the AI to governed source material and prohibits any invention, is that the ultimate safeguard of professional truth? Or does treating AI as a hyper-constrained mechanical parser risk undermining its very real value as a nuanced market translator?
It's a fantastic question.
I think so. And my position is that source-bound prompting is the absolute non-negotiable firewall of professional integrity in this system. If we allow the AI to generate claims based on what a user wants to be true, rather than what the LPR proves to be true, the entire system falls apart.
Well, I understand the instinct to build a firewall. I really do. But my perspective is that placing all our faith in the rigidity of the prompt itself is a massive trap. If you hyper-constrain an AI, especially when dealing with thin or emerging evidence, you don't necessarily get truth.
But you prevent lies.
You get what the curriculum calls generic professionalism, text that is highly machine-readable but entirely human unbelievable. I argue that true AI governance relies far more on rigorous, post-generation human claim checking than on the illusion of a perfect initial prompt.
Let's ground this directly in the core doctrine of Module 7, though. The curriculum states it perfectly. AI can help translate. AI cannot decide truth. And the only way to operationalize that doctrine is through strict source-bound prompting.
But how does that look mechanically?
Well, let's look at clip 3 from the material. It breaks it down clearly. A source-bound prompt limits AI to govern source material. The fundamental rule is, do not prompt AI from desire. Prompt AI from the record.
Yeah, the desire to sound impressive is definitely the enemy of truth here.
Exactly. When someone sits down at a keyboard and types, make me sound impressive for an operations manager role, they are prompting from desire. They're asking the machine to be the authority on their career. A good prompt is the exact opposite.
Right, it forces constraints.
Yes, a good prompt says what the audience is, what the purpose is, what evidence AI may use, what claims are prohibited, what privacy boundary applies, and crucially, what AI must not invent.
That is an incredibly comprehensive list of constraints, though.
It has to be. Look at the example provided in the material. A governed prompt looks like this. Using only the evidence below, create 3 resume bullet options. Do not invent metrics, titles, clients, tools, scope, or outcomes. Preserve claim boundaries and flag anything that needs more evidence.
Okay, yes?
That is source-bounded prompting. It neutralizes the human urge to inflate ownership and scope before a single word is even generated.
I mean, the definition is incredibly clear, but I have to challenge the idea that this actually solves the fundamental interpretation problem. We need to look at how large language models actually function under the hood. They are not rule-following machines in the way a calculator is.
They follow the constraints of their context window.
But they are statistical prediction engines. When an AI is perfectly source-bound to evidence that is, well, perhaps a bit thin, it hits a wall. It is forbidden from inventing facts, but its core programming is statistically driven to produce fluent, professional text.
So it tries to bridge the gap.
Yes, exactly. And what does it do? It overcompensates by generating vague, buzzword-heavy polish. The material specifically warns about this generic language problem. Say you feed it a few basic notes about coordinating a project. Because you've locked it down from inventing concrete metrics, it spits out, results-driven professional, with a proven ability to leverage cross-functional collaboration and strategic execution to deliver measurable impact.
Which lacks specific evidence.
It lacks everything. I mean, that sentence is perfectly grammatically polished. It hasn't technically invented on a false metric, so it obeyed your strict prompt, but it is entirely devoid of operational texture.
Well,
Imagine a hiring manager sitting at a desk, sifting through 100 resumes that all sound exactly like that. It means absolutely nothing to them. So the strict prompt creates a false sense of security. You think you've governed the AI because you locked the prompt, but you've actually just forced it to hallucinate in the abstract rather than the concrete.
but see, that generic buzzword soup isn't the AI failing the prompt. It is the user failing the AI. It's a classic garbage in, garbage out problem, which is exactly why the curriculum requires a safe source packet before you even write a single prompt.
Okay, but how does the packet solve the generic language issue?
By providing the right kind of fuel. For anyone unfamiliar, a safe source packet isn't just a raw data dump. You don't just paste your entire messy hard drive or performance reviews into the AI and hope the prompt saves you.
Right, of course not.
The LPR advisor is trained to curate this data first. You provide safe summaries, specific evidence IDs, clear claim boundaries, and privacy labels. You're handing the AI a perfectly clean, sanitized set of facts. The prompt is simply the lock on the door to keep it confined to those facts.
Okay, but even with a beautifully constructed safe source packet, the AI is still going to drift.
Let's take the onboarding checklist example from the material. Say a client created a simple shared onboarding checklist for one team during a high turnover period. If you feed that into an AI loosely, sure, it will hallucinate a company-wide transformation.
Oh, guaranteed.
But if your safe source packet strictly defines the claim boundaries, stating the evidence only supports coordination and explicitly prohibits claims of HR strategy ownership, the source-bound prompt works. It prevents the AI from inflating a basic checklist into an enterprise-wide initiative.
It might stop it from inventing an enterprise-wide initiative, I'll give you that. But it doesn't stop verb inflation, which is, honestly, it's far more insidious. The material itself warns us about this. You give the AI the boundary, client coordinated a checklist. The AI looks at the word coordinated because it was trained on millions of highly inflated resumes on the internet. The semantic proximity between coordinated and words like spearheaded, pioneered, or orchestrated is very tight.
Which is why a good prompt explicitly says, use coordinated or supported unless the evidence clearly supports led.
And the AI routinely ignores that nuance. It doesn't see spearheaded as a factual invention that violates your boundary instructions. It mathematically calculates that spearheaded is a stylistic translation of the concept of coordination that just better matches a professional tone. It thinks it is doing you a favor.
Exactly, because it has no concept of claim maturity. It doesn't know that spearheaded carries a completely different human burden of proof than supported.
Look, if the AI hallucinates spearheaded, it is because the user left a gap in the prompt that allowed stylistic desire to creep in. This goes back to that profound philosophical shift: do not prompt AI from desire. If a user approaches an AI and asks it to bridge the gap between their rough notes and a target job description, they are inherently asking the AI to be the authority on what they are qualified to do. But source-bound prompting forces the user to do the hard cognitive work of defining the exact parameters first. The record must govern the AI, not the other way around.
But bridging that gap is exactly what the curriculum calls market translation. Toolkit 3.5 explicitly tells advisors to use AI to suggest possible role families, search terms, problem space language, and adjacent titles. If the AI is locked in a box, strictly bound only to the historical record, the exact words and constraints of what happened in the past, how on earth is it supposed to generate hypotheses for future market translation?
It translates what is there.
To translate, it must be allowed to step outside the source material to access the target language of the broader market.
You are confusing the lexicon with the evidence. Let's think about this through the analogy of a legal translator. Say you have a highly complex, historically situated legal statute written in French, and you need it translated into English for a modern court.
Okay, I'm following.
A professional legal translator can suggest the best, most accurate target language phrasing for that complex statute. They are matching the source to the appropriate vernacular of the audience. That is market translation.
Sure.
But that legal translator is absolutely forbidden from adding clauses, changing the scope of the liability, or making the statute sound stronger just because the client wishes they had a stronger case. If the source notes are thin or the legal statute is weak, the solution isn't to loosen the constraints on the translator and say, just make it sound good.
Well, no one is saying that.
The human must go gather more evidence. If you want AI to suggest market terms, you bind it to the evidence and ask, based strictly on these supported claims, what are adjacent role titles in this industry? You do not ask it to invent the experience required to fit a predetermined title.
The legal translator analogy sounds great in theory, but here is where it completely breaks down in reality. A human legal translator understands the concept of truth. They understand liability. If they add a rogue clause, they know they are committing malpractice.
Right.
An LMM doesn't have a moral compass or a concept of reality. As we just discussed, it is a statistical token predictor. So when you treat it like a human translator who can faithfully obey a command to not invent, you are anthropomorphizing a math equation.
I am not anthropomorphizing it. I am setting strict mathematical boundaries on its output generation.
But those boundaries fail, which brings us to where the rubber actually meets the road, the post-generation workflow. Where does the actual governance happen? You are placing the crown of governance on the prompt, but the curriculum's heavy insistence on the AI output claim check and the rejected AI claims log proves that the prompt is inherently fallible.
The prompt isn't meant to be magic. The claim check and the rejection log are necessary verification steps.
They are far more than verification, though. They are the true mechanism of truth. The curriculum mandates that advisors must be willing to reject AI output. It explicitly states that even good-sounding output may be unusable. Why? Because the prompt will inevitably fail.
It won't inevitably fail if it's strictly bound.
It will. The AI will take your onboarding checklist, look at the prompt telling it not to invent, and it will still spit out led enterprise-wide digital adoption strategy, improving productivity across departments. It will invent a metric like improved productivity because statistically in its training data, checklists are associated with productivity improvements.
And that is exactly what the advisor must catch during the review.
Yes, the real governance happens when the human looks at that output, rejects the AI's claim in the rejected AI claims log, and manually revises it to supported digital tool rollout by maintaining issue tracker. The prompt is just the starting line. It is an opening bid. The rejection log and the manual human revision, that is where the living professional record is actually protected. The obsession with the perfect source-bound prompt distracts from the messy, essential human work of pruning the AI statistical drift.
You know, you're right about the necessity of the review phase, but here is where dismissing the strict prompt becomes deeply dangerous. Let's talk about how the human brain actually processes information. There is a well-documented psychological phenomenon where fluency is unconsciously interpreted as accuracy. When a reviewer reads a paragraph that is perfectly structured, grammatically flawless, and uses high-level professional vocabulary, their brain naturally lowers their guard.
We naturally trust things that sound confident. That's true.
Exactly. So without the strict source-bound prompt acting as a firewall, the AI output claim check becomes an impossible cognitive task. Think about the concept of the blast radius. If you allow the AI to ingest raw, ungoverned data and you prompt it loosely, the resulting output won't just have one or two obvious errors like an invented number. It will be deeply structurally entangled with subtle inventions, slight scope inflations, and massive privacy violations.
Can you give an example of what that entanglement looks like in practice?
Sure, a loosely prompted AI might weave a confidential client name from a raw performance review into a generic achievement, or it might blend an emerging beginner-level skill with a mature competency so seamlessly that the sentence sounds perfectly natural. When faced with beautifully fluent, highly persuasive text that is fundamentally poisoned with subtle inaccuracies, human beings experience profound cognitive fatigue.
So the reviewer essentially gets tired of fighting the machine.
They get exhausted. After correcting the 10th subtle lie wrapped in beautiful prose, they just give up. They default to trusting the fluency. They accept the polish. By enforcing a strict source-bound prompt, you radically limit the blast radius of those AI errors. You ensure that when the AI does drift, like inflating coordinated to spearheaded, it is a localized, isolated error.
It's easier to catch.
Yes, it is easy to spot in the AI output claim check, rather than a systemic hallucination that infects the entire narrative. The strict prompt is what makes the human review survivable.
I have to say, the point about cognitive fatigue is incredibly valid. If the draft is 80% hallucination, the human gives up and just accepts it. I agree that source bounding limits that blast radius, but I still maintain that we must not idolize the prompt. The danger of teaching people that if you get the prompt right, the output is safe, is that it creates exactly the kind of complacency we are trying to avoid.
Which is why the curriculum hammers home the idea that fluency is not evidence.
Precisely. To preserve the client's actual voice and professional truth, we have to approach every single piece of AI output with deep, structural suspicion. We have to recognize that even with a perfect safe source packet, the AI will still drift. It will still try to erase the distinctive human constraints of the work to make everyone sound like a generic transformation strategist.
Right.
It will strip away the operational texture that makes a claim human believable. The prompt is necessary hygiene, yes, but rigorous adversarial post-generation claim checking is the actual medicine.
And I think that brings us to a really powerful point of convergence here. Whether we emphasize the discipline of the prompt up front or the rigor of the review on the back end, we both arrive at the ultimate doctrine of Module 7. AI can help the record speak, but AI cannot decide what the record is allowed to say. By insisting on source-bound prompting, I am arguing for maintaining a strict chain of custody between the original evidence and the final rendered surface. We have to explicitly tell the AI what it cannot invent so that the human remains the author of their own professional truth.
And I completely agree that the human must remain the author. My caution is simply that we cannot let the elegance of a prompt design blind us to the statistical realities of language models. AI belongs strictly after governance, not before it. It can assist in structuring our translation, but we have to be willing to look at a highly polished, grammatically flawless sentence and reject it entirely because it simply isn't true. We have to log those rejections to prove we aren't being seduced by the machine's fluency.
Which perfectly frames why LPR Academy mandates this specific training in such a rigorous way. Every advisor candidate must demonstrate governed AI-assisted work in their capstone. They aren't allowed to just use automated tools to bypass this learning. They have to manually prepare the safe source packet, write the source-bound prompt outlining the audience, purpose, and prohibited claims, perform the claim check, log their rejected claims, and do the manual revision.
Yeah, it's intense.
They have to prove they can navigate this exact tension between translation and authority.
It really is the only way to prove they have source-governed AI judgment. You have to actively feel the AI trying to pull you toward inflation, and you have to deliberately pull it back to the evidence.
Exactly. It forces us all to ask a fundamental question about how we operate in this new landscape. When you look at that beautifully polished professional surface, that pristine skyscraper we talked about earlier, are you prompting from the record to build a real steel frame of evidence, or are you simply prompting from desire, using AI to paint a beautiful but entirely empty facade?
That is the defining test of professional integrity right now.
It absolutely is. We'll leave it there for today. Thank you for listening to the debate. Until next time, keep examining the evidence beneath the surface.